All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started, Rachel?
Great. Thank you so much, Justina. And thanks for organizing this panel. It's such an important topic. And we are really excited to be here today. We had a meeting in advance to plan this panel, and we had such a great discussion just with the people here, planning it in advance, that I know that today is going to be really exciting. So I am just going to introduce name and title, and we'll go to all the panelists to do the same so that you all in the audience can see who we are. You'll have clarity about who will be speaking just briefly. And then we'll just give really brief remarks after that, and kind of a consecutive series of little presentations. And we're open to questions throughout, but we'll, if you want to type them into the chat before you forget them, for example. But we'll have a lot of time for discussion, for open discussion after that, as Justina mentioned. So we're really excited to talk to you. So I'm Rachel Arciaga. I'm the Assistant Director of the Simpson Center for the Humanities at the University of Washington. And I do not teach English at a two-year college, and so it may be a question why I'm on this panel. And the answer is that we have a program at the Simpson Center that directly engages community colleges and doctoral students learning more about those places and about what they mean and what their value is. So my insights today that I want to share with all of you derive from that program and its participants and the campuses we work with in our partnership. So I'll go next to Brian, and then we'll just kind of go down the line to all make sure you know who we are, and then I'll get started with some slides.
Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate it. Yes, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'll just say very, very quickly, I'll leave more of the background for when I have 5 minutes, that my name is Brian Gutierrez, and I am an adjunct instructor at North Seattle College, where I've been for about 13 years. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Latoya, could you go next?
Sure. Hi, my name is Latoya Reed. I am a tenured professor at Tacoma Community College, and I teach developmental education there as well as composition.
Hi folks, I'm Travis Margoni. I'm an English department faculty member at Yakima Valley College. This is my 6th academic year here. I'm not tenured yet, but on that line eventually. That's a whole nother talking point.
We will talk about tenure. That will have to come up, I think. It's an important topic. I think we should first talk about community colleges as places that are really specific contexts. So I'll start with that. I'm going to do some screen sharing of slides. You'll see all the apparatus of PowerPoint around it because I'm not going to make it too elegant, but we're ready to go. So I will talk through these slides with you. What we know about community colleges is that they're extremely diverse, that there are quite a lot of them, and that they are often stigmatized in higher education. So to keep this extremely brief, that's the outline of what I'll be talking about today. I hope that these opening remarks for the panel will help us kind of frame questions of self-reflection that people need to go through really thoughtfully if they have any intention of applying for positions at two-year colleges and pursuing careers at two-year colleges. We have learned a lot at the Simpson Center over the past 6 years with support from the Andrew Mellon Foundation about community colleges, the humanities, the state of the humanities and community colleges, and we have met fantastic faculty there. What we've learned from them, though, too, has been really kind of concerning. So we know that community colleges are routinely stigmatized in higher education, particularly often in doctoral programs where people are being trained to be the future faculty in the United States. What we also know, on the other hand, though, is that these institutions demonstrate a substantive commitment to diversity, equity, class mobility, and racial justice, among other really important values. I think that most people in the humanities and the academic humanities at all levels of our training would express a commitment to those same values. But to take on a career in community colleges is to live out those values. So we want to see a situation in which doctoral students, master's students, people who are interested in working in two-year colleges are empowered in really specific and, I think, articulate ways about how to advocate for that career path for themselves if they're interested in it, better understand two-year colleges and the value that they represent to society, and to pursue this work without themselves internalizing any further, ideally, the stigmatization around these colleges. So that requires a pretty intense sense of place, and this all goes back to each campus being really, really different. And we'll get into that as a job kind of networking strategy and an application strategy too. This photograph is of two of our participants in our program, a faculty mentor at South Seattle College and a current doctoral student at the University of Washington. They're in philosophy, and they worked together for a year talking about what does it mean to teach philosophy at community colleges. There is a fantastic article in The Atlantic from a few years ago called Why I Teach Plato to Plumbers. It's about teaching philosophy in the two-year colleges and why it has so much value to society. Likewise, we could make arguments about why it is so valuable to teach English at two-year colleges, right? I just want to run through a few quotes from our participants to show you the value of what we've been learning about. So Paul Tubig, who was the fellow in the prior photo, says, having attended a community college, now a doctoral student, it's been interesting to re-enter that setting as an aspiring professor, right? So many, but not all, faculty in the two-year colleges have personal experience in the two-year colleges. They've attended them, they have benefited from that system, and now they're able to make new contributions to it. That's something to think about, that you may want to surface in your own life. What we've seen is that many of our fellows have completely submerged through that stigmatization process, right? They've submerged any mention of their own two-year college experiences, even if they have an AA. They drop it from their CV, it's not visible. It's not a visible part of their profile, right? Because why would you display that about yourself if you believe that you'll be judged harshly for it and negatively? So Paul is surfacing here something really important, which is that he comes from these places and he could go back to them if he wants to, right, and teach there. Junjun Hay Weatherford was a fellow of ours in English and in the program, and she is now faculty in English at Bellevue College. This is not always the outcome for our fellows. They often go on to many diverse careers. But she found that what she valued was represented in these institutions to such a degree that she felt that it was the best possible fit for her professionally. And so she very aggressively and deftly found a way to approach the job market with community colleges in mind. And she has this to say about diversity. My immersive experience at Seattle Central College helped me realize that there are educational contexts and possibilities that might exceed the superficial celebration and continued marginalization of minoritized populations. That's a really powerful quote. I mean, that encapsulates what she's going to do in her career at Bellevue. Those are her goals. Those are her values. If a quote like that resonates with you, I would encourage you to look into this much more deeply as an option for yourself. I also want to mention as I close this little set of remarks that two-year college faculty are phenomenal people, and we've learned a lot about what they value and what they do, to the point that I would say, and I regularly describe them as public scholars. Here's a quote from Chris Borges at North. He's a historian. He says, as a professor at a community college, I see my role in the humanities ecosystem as building historical knowledge in our society, right? Not necessarily for serving a scholarly community, though his work does that as well, but to also serve public communities, right? And the intersection of scholarly communities and public communities takes place at community colleges every single day. I'm going to let the other speakers tell you more about what community colleges look like, who the students are, what the faculty role really entails, and then I think crucially too to our panel and its topic, how to land a job there, how to be an effective fit for these positions. But not only to get a job, but also to thrive in that role and to contribute a lot to your students, which will be your goal as a professor at a two-year college. So I will turn it over to our next speaker with that. If you have any questions, we're going to open it up.
Wow, thank you so much, Rachel. I'm actually going to underscore pretty much everything that you just said. So there will be a lot of overlap there, but I think the message is so important that that's absolutely okay. And I have just some very limited remarks here, but to extend Rachel's comments, make no mistake that the stigmas related to teaching at the two-year college are informed by racist, classist, colonialist notions about who gets to have a good education and what a good education even looks like. I've offered this statement before publicly, but a community that is holistic in its care is a community that is best positioned to withstand hardship. And that particular comment or idea is really at the heart. It's the ethos of the modern day community college mission. So, you know, we are different from our four-year counterparts in so much that usually they're presented as this dichotomy between, being scholars and, teaching, but that's not really accurate. The difference here is that community colleges increase educational access and opportunity. They support and expand the middle class, and they cultivate connections within the local communities. Each school is a product of its community, and that's really important to recognize that. So upon considering the mission of, the contemporary community college, then we can accept, as graduates are coming out of their programs and making choices about their careers, those graduates can accept proudly, unequivocally, that they want to be community college faculty. They can also understand that teaching at a community college should not be thought of as settling and should really be thought of as making a bold statement about where your priorities lie. So to invest yourself and your talents as a community college faculty member then means that the following. It means that you believe our students deserve highly qualified, highly educated teachers, and that those kinds of teachers aren't just reserved for four-year colleges. It means that you understand our institutions put into praxis the theories that are part of four-year discourses. It means that you are rejecting the false choice between being a teacher and being a scholar. And it means that you are rejecting those classist, racist, ableist, colonialist ideas about who our students are and what they're capable of. Our students at the two-year college level are just as capable of transforming our world, and they deserve to have community college teachers who can prepare them for that future that they want to design. And now I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that, Latoya and Rachel. These are really fantastic remarks that, again, speak not only volumes to all the topics that we're talking about today, but also personally kind of resonate with me as well as somebody who was a non-traditional student who went to a community college as well, and didn't get his undergrad until he was well into his 30s. So I'm going to talk today very quickly about the life of an adjunct and other professional opportunities that you might consider within two-year colleges. Just to make sure that we're all on the same page here, if we're all looking at my slide deck, can we all see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm dealing with a few different monitors, and sometimes the share screen pops up on not the same monitor. So that's great. So again, my name is Brian Gutierrez, and I have been, just a little bit of a quick background with me. So I've always had some foot, if you will, in the world of community colleges and two-year colleges. I first completed, as I've already said, I was a community college student. And when I was doing my MA at Cal State Sacramento, I actually completed our certificate in teaching college composition. And in doing that, I had an internship at the community college that happened to be right across the street from the high school that I went to. So it was a little bit of a homecoming for me. I was an adjunct at North Seattle for nearly 10 years, from 2007 to 2017, while I was in the doctoral program at University of Washington. And then because of the experiences that I had, and I can talk about this in the Q&A, the experiences that I had and the opportunities I had at the doctoral program at University of Washington, I was able to parlay that into actually a grant director position where I worked for Central Oregon Community College as their director of a Title III grant, which is a large federal multi-million-dollar grant that's geared at strengthening an institution. And so I did that for 2 years, and then now I'm back in the greater Seattle area as an adjunct faculty. So just a quick preface about the adjunct life. I've had long experiences as an adjunct at North Seattle, and I actually adjunct as well when I was at Central Oregon Community College. So I need to say before I get into those experiences quickly that not all adjunct positions are equal. They all have different compensation packages and benefit packages and different shared governance opportunities. So really what I'm going to be speaking to again should not be thought of as kind of a blanket experience that would stretch over all adjunct life, but again, which is particular to my experiences at those institutions. So my experiences at North have been absolutely fantastic. I've been really able to participate as much in opportunities as much as I've wanted to, and as much as I've had bandwidth to do it. And I've done things such as proposed and taught linked courses through the integrated studies program. I've been on hiring committees. I've been selected for committees for initiatives as well. I've designed and facilitated professional development workshops. And then I've actively participated in faculty meetings. So with that, the pros for me with this adjunct life of my time at North Seattle College is that I've really, in the 10 plus years that I've been here, I've really always felt incredibly welcomed and valued, and I've felt that I've been able to participate and be a part without being tenured faculty, without being part of that faculty community. And never felt really as an outsider or marginalized how one might, and I have friends that are at different four-year institutions that are lecturers that definitely can speak to that sense of marginalization of being contingent faculty and not tenure faculty. And that's never been the case for me. And it's also been a boon with the flexible schedule because of my family needs and been able to juggle the work-life balance with my partner and our children, which has been fantastic. So the con with that is probably pretty elementary for everybody, is that the employment is dependent on enrollment. I was for a long period of time, though, priority hire status before I left for Central Oregon Community College, which is much more of a secure position than where I'm currently at right now. But so there are more secure positions as well that are not necessarily tenure faculty positions that are part of that that it's still a part of that landscape. So some professional opportunities that I wanted to just point to quickly with two-year colleges. The first thing that really gave me some thought about where and how to kind of pursue other opportunities would be for the 9+ years as a graduate student at University of Washington, teaching first-year composition courses for all intents and purposes, and really feeling like these are experiences that I am being involved in for my students, right, their first year out of college. And so what I've noticed, especially while I was working as the director for the Title III grant, is that FYE programs are really expanding across 2- and 4-year colleges. And a lot of what I did and a lot of what we do, as graduate students, working is, through, especially in composition courses, having the back and forth with students. There's a lot of mentoring that's happening, a lot of, advising that's not the same sort of advising that takes place really kind of in, in an advising office per particular trajectories. So paying attention to those is something, and if you're really interested in and like those connections and those opportunities, that there are definitely career paths that you could pursue. And so in addition to, again, the first experience programs, they're growing as one potential career path. Other student services and instructional related positions that definitely share the same orbit of some of the, if not many of the tasks that we would do as graduate students and as TAs, would be looking at positions within diversity, equity, and inclusion offices, potentially within advising, e-learning, as well as tutoring, writing, and student learning centers. And so the quick bit about then, with life as a graduate student, when you're doing and juggling so many things between, course load, between dissertating, maybe working a second job as well, family obligations, all those sort of things, that if there is time to squeeze in, here's some things that you might consider. One, to participate in fellowship programs if there are opportunities like that Rachel has already spoke to at University of Washington, that might open up pathways to diverse career options. Look for internships and shadowing opportunities at your home institution. Again, if something like a first-year experience program, after you're doing a little research, interests you, see if there's one at your home institution. See if there's an opportunity to do an internship or, shadow those folks. Conduct informational interviews for, again, talking to people that are in positions that might be potentially interesting career paths. Sit down with them, coffee, tea, and take some notes, have an informational interview with these folks. And then also look for professional certificate opportunities that might complement the work that you're already doing as a graduate student, which would not mean that you're actually doing double duty. And so something like instructional design would definitely complement, current teaching loads, as well as present potentially different career opportunities beyond beyond English faculty. So that's it. I hope that was within, I think that was within the 5 minutes. And you do have my contact information that's on here, and it's also in the Google Sheet as well. So thanks so much.
All right, I think that leaves me. I'm sort of inclined to just continue listening to you all. It's also insightful, so thank you. And again, like Latoya said, a little bit of overlap perhaps on what I'm going to say here, but I thought I'd just mention briefly here my path from teaching at an R1 to teaching at a 2-year college, and sort of how that transpired and what it looked like, and then sort of what the college landscape looks like now, where I'm teaching at an HSI, minority serving institution. I started my career teaching high school, and then I went to grad school, and then I moved to R1s, and I taught at the University of Utah with a master's degree for 4 years on their professional tenure line, not the faculty tenure track, right? It's sort of a separate tenure line. After 4 years there, I decided I wanted to, I met Christy Toth, who is a fantastic researcher and scholar and educator. She helped found Teacher Scholar Advocate, which is a website you should check out as well. But she has a lot of scholarship on 2-year colleges. Christy gave me all of her research and said, hey, take all of my PDFs and read about this, right? And I started reading what she had written, and looked at TYC, Teaching English in the 2-year college, and really tried to learn about the landscape of 2-year colleges, right? And then I did the necessary research on the colleges I was applying to. I think 1 year I applied to 25 colleges. The second year, when I actually accepted a position and was offered a couple more positions, I think I applied to 32 colleges around the country. And so I settled on here. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to come to Yakima Valley College. But what really drove me here was the fact that this was an HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution. And my own priorities were such that I wanted to work on equity, wanted to, work with minoritized communities, had examined to some degree my whiteness and my role in coming into that type of environment as well. And I continue to learn in that sense too. But the actual process, I won't go into all the details of this story, but nobody's waiting for you at the 2-year college when you show up for that interview, right? I didn't know where to stay in town. I stayed at a hotel that I would not stay at again if I were coming to interview again. Okay, a couple of funny stories about it, and it turned out fine. And I was excited to have this opportunity and to sort of see the campus environment. I walked around campus and introduced myself or I shouldn't say I introduced myself, but as much as I chatted with a few students about what they thought about YVC and the college that I was applying to, right? And you have to sort of take the initiative and do that yourself, because there's not a committee waiting for you to escort you around and take you to dinner and all of that. So it's a different environment. Now I've been on a few hiring committees too, and I can say, 3/4 of our applicants, we get about 90 applicants per position for English department. And that's qualified, people who qualify for the position meet the min quals, right? And probably 3/4 of those are PhDs who don't seem to have really articulated that YVC is the right college for them, right? It may be that they focus on their scholarship, and their scholarship doesn't necessarily look at teaching a whole lot, or doesn't involve, they haven't made the connection to their teaching, right? Or maybe that they didn't recognize and didn't acknowledge that we're an HSI, for example. If you don't do that, you're not going to get in the door for an interview, of course. Here, you don't understand what our college is really about. Where I'm now the faculty lead, I just sort of help organize our equity team's subcommittee on hiring. And we're using the DEHPD, Diversity, Equity, and Hiring Practices, is a statewide organization, a statewide group that put together guidelines for hiring in an equitable way. I'll share that link after I'm done talking here. We're not there yet. These are 17 steps that we're trying to get to in hiring and being more equitable in our hiring. We're not there yet, right? And I think that might be where I transition into talking for just a minute here about activism in the 2-year college too. Each 2-year college looks different. There are different opportunities for leadership. There's different opportunities for equity work and anti-racist development going on here, curriculum development as well. But the colleges are going to look differently. We don't have a faculty senate, for example, but we do have a strong union. While we don't have a faculty senate for shared governance, our faculty are really involved right now in reshaping our strategic plan. We created the equity team. A handful of us came together and said, it was really led by a couple of Latinx faculty members that I work with who led the charge on this and found the right allies and brought us all together to create an equity team and really create systemic change here. And it's ongoing. It's tough work. It's really tough work. But there's also opportunities at the state level to do this type of work too, depending on the state that you're in. Of course, those opportunities may be more or less available to you. But I know I've worked with Latoya and Justina on some statewide work too. The opportunities in the 2-year college system can be really profound in terms of what the possibilities are there. But in a certain college in a certain state, you might find that you feel a little bit alienated at that time in that way as well. So there's a lot of work to do, and we need you all to be invested in that work, like others have said too. And so if you feel like your scholarship, your passion, your priorities are such that the 2-year college is the right place for you, reach out at any time. I know that all of us here on the panel would be happy to talk with you about that. And I think I'll conclude my 5 minutes with that.
All right, thank you so much, Rachel, Brian, Latoya, and Travis. Those were some really insightful remarks, and I think that has jump-started a lot of really good questions. So let's move into the Q&A session. Just a reminder, in case anyone has missed it, we do have a link to a Google Doc in the chat, and in that Google Doc you can ask questions and we will try to address them. So the very first question is a good one. The person I guess I don't know whose name it was, but they said, thank you for your eloquent remarks. What is the nature of scholarship and research beyond teaching support in a community college role? I'm thinking about institutional support, whether that is administrative, from colleagues, etc., for research, book writing, publishing, surveys, studies, reading events, etc. So if any of the panelists would like to answer that question, feel free and I will let you.
So I will try to chip away at it, but I think the answer simply is it depends on your institution. I know at my institution there's not any kind of formal support, but I published a tiny little article with a colleague of mine while we were both on the tenure track. I've had some other colleagues do the same, and we were able to use it for tenure, and so that helped. But yeah, there weren't any kind of formal supports for that, but I imagine that there are some two-year colleges where there is something more in place.
Yeah, I can also speak a little bit to this question. So I would say, as far as the nature of scholarship and research beyond teaching support, at my institution, which is North Seattle College, there is a little bit of financial support. So faculty at North Seattle can apply to funding to go to academic conferences or to present at academic conferences. There's not a ton of money available. At our institution, it's about $1,500 a year, but that seems like a lot to me because coming from graduate school, there was a lot less funding for that kind of thing. So there is financial support. Beyond the financial support, I would say that my dean and other faculty members really support scholarship and research, but any scholarship or research that a faculty member does is very much self-guided. So for example, if I wanted to publish a paper or do research in a classroom, I could probably do that with all the support in the world from my dean, but it would be very much a self-guided process. So that's just kind of my personal institution, basically.
I guess I'll briefly add that at my institution, at least, and Stacy mentioned in the chat too, that hiring practices and colleges differ widely, like even within the same state, our practices, right, for hiring or for professional development funds, things like that. So here, there's support financially if your scholarship relates to the mission in some way. Like does it may be more or less about teaching, but does it relate to the college? Does it relate to the campus community and where we're trying to go? Then I think that you could definitely find quite a bit of support for it. If you can't make that connection though, you may find at some colleges that the support feels lacking.
All right. I'd love to, I know we have so many questions, pursue other topics too, and I won't chip in on this exact topic, but I do want to note that because this is set up as a meeting rather than a webinar, we can see some familiar names and faces, so to speak, and we know there's a lot of talent in the room. So I wonder, with people who have experience into your colleges but who are not on the panel, if you have more to say also in response, I'm open to having the chat feature function for that, or the Google Doc too. And I would encourage you to respond as well and put your contact information, your institutional email address, if you're willing to talk to students in this session who are interested in a deeper conversation. That would just be something I'm going to throw out there. You also should feel no obligation to do that. But I know that there are insights that are going to be latent here if we don't call that out. So Justina, back to you on where we should go next in the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rachel. Like Rachel said, this can definitely be a conversational thing. If anybody wants to speak up, feel free to kind of raise a hand in the chat, and I'll try to monitor that. But we do have a lot of questions, so why don't we move on to the next one? And if there were any follow-up questions from the first one, feel free to type those in and we can get to them. So the second question, a major value of mine as an instructor is personal relationships with students. Do you find yourself fostering such relationships with students? If so, could you speak about the value of those relationships and or how you are able to build them? Do you encounter students who feel as though they have settled by attending a two-year college? How do you relate to and inspire such students?
I can break the pause and say that I think the relationships are especially important at a two-year college, and I know I and others work really hard to establish those relationships. For example, I have the third sibling in a family in my class this quarter, and I'm so excited about it. You know, I'm going to get her little brother probably someday too, right? Because we've developed relationships and really know the community. Yeah, the other part of that question, in terms of challenging, I think that we have to challenge students who feel like they may be settling at a two-year college, right? Show them that it is intellectually engaging, that they can be pushed here, that we understand that they may feel like they're settling, right? That we have an awareness of that as well, and sort of even discuss that stigma and talk about higher ed and the barriers that exist, and you know how the two-year college really fits into their educational plans.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I can't say that I've ever had a student who has felt that they were settling. I imagine I probably have, but they haven't actually communicated that idea to me. And it might just be because like once they got into the class, they were like, oh shit, right? So I don't know. I don't know. But I will say that just, you know, just like Travis said, any student who did kind of communicate that idea, I would definitely push back lovingly and gently. Um, as for the first part of the question, how do we connect with students? Can we connect with students? Oh, absolutely. I actually, you know, in this whole time of kind of remote learning, I've been really struggling with not having my office because my office was definitely a place where students would come, they would grab snack, or actually not even just my office, my whole hallway is an interdisciplinary hallway. And if any student had any one of us, by the end of the quarter, they were familiar with just about everybody in the hallway. They'd come, they'd drop by, they'd get candy, they'd get snacks, they'd get sanitary napkins, they'd come and, you know, shoot the breeze, they'd come and do their homework in my office, even if I wasn't there. And all of that has just lent itself to building community. And so I'm really, really missing that. And I won't say that can't be established on a four-year campus, but I don't know, I think there's something special about a two-year college that allows for that kind of atmosphere.
Thank you. And I would just quickly add that, yeah, I've had the same very, very similar experiences in that having a foot in both worlds in the same day, that is teaching a composition course at the University of Washington, then going later that evening to teach at North Seattle. I've always felt that I've had more connections and deeper connections to my students. My students are willing. You know, that it's not that I'm any different, but that they're just different, that they're more willing to be open, more willing to have those connections, more willing to have a potluck at the end of the quarter, and follow up as well. And never really had a student talk about settling. But I've had, which are incredibly gratifying, I've had students later on send some sort of a note saying how much they appreciated the instruction that they had once they did, if they eventually transferred to a four-year institution, how much it helped them, make that transition and be successful. So, yeah.
I would just go so far as to say that if you are not going to engage in relationships with students that are substantive and lasting, that it would be difficult to succeed in a career at a two-year college. I mean, I would kind of flip the question, right? It's what are you prepared to do? Are you prepared to have a line out the door in your office hours? Because you will, especially if you're faculty of color. Okay, so think about what will be asked of you. Also, there are high demands for relationships with you. You may be the first person who is kind of embodies higher education as a system, who has actually taken a real interest in the student and believes in their success. That's a great privilege. To me, that would be the greatest privilege as a teacher. Like, I get emotional talking about it, you know? But the idea that, and I think what we have to work against is this concept, there was a question in the list too about teaching loads. We need to address that, because what I would think of perceiving the two-year colleges as having such high teaching loads that perhaps if I have a 4, a 5, or whatever, how am I going to engage with any students at all? Because how will I even remember them? I mean, there'll be so many students. It's just not customary for doctoral students, especially, to be trained for that level of volume of students, how many students they're handling, papers, especially in English. We're talking about grading. We got to talk about that. Workload issues are relationship issues. So I think all that's really key, but that is not the thing that keeps you from having the relationships, right? The relationships, what you're doing at a two-year college is student-centered work. And so that's where the relationships happen, is because you're focused on their success, right?
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say, Rachel. So that's a really great point. Like the job at a community college is to foster those relationships with students. So it's such an essential part of what you're doing in the classroom and outside the classroom. And kind of, again, speaking to what Rachel said, like, I mean, as a graduate student, I had one class, and of course I invested a lot of energy into that class, but it's nothing like having 3 classes of 25 to 30 students, and they will be in your office hours. They will be working with you very closely. They'll be emailing you. They'll be staying after class to talk with you. So it's a very different kind of context. And that's what's so great about the community college as well, is being able to establish those relationships. So we have a couple more questions that are kind of quicker ones, I think. One of them is, does your institution sponsor work visas for international employees who received their degrees in the US? I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm not sure if the others on the panelists know the answer, but if you do, would you like to speak up? Latoya, you're saying no. Travis, do you know?
I should double check. My first thought was yes, but I have to double check. So don't take that as certainty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that would be a question that is kind of institution specific. And even though I've been on a hiring committee and Travis has been on a hiring committee, we still don't know the answer. So you might need to talk to HR or something to answer that one. The next question, what is priority status for adjuncts and how do you get that status? There was an answer here provided in the Google Doc, which is that the status called priority hire is a step below tenured faculty, but also I think a step above adjunct faculty. It's kind of in the middle ground, because in the Seattle colleges, if you are priority hire, you must teach 2 classes a quarter for 5 quarters over 9 quarters. And you are given the next choice of classes after tenured faculty. So if you're priority hire, that's actually kind of a good place to be, because you're sort of guaranteed classes, but you're not teaching a full-time load. As far as how you get priority hire, I'm not exactly sure. I think the Seattle colleges have ended that, but Brian, maybe you could speak to that. And in addition, I'm not sure if other institutions have priority hire faculty any longer. That might be an institution-specific thing. Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
I have nothing to add to that other than, yeah, you're right. I think it is it's definitely an institution-specific thing. And I believe a little bit later on, this will intersect. There are different levels of tenure from institution to institution, you know, in the way in which the tenure is treated at a particular institution, whether it's kind of a flat hierarchy or whether it's just whether it actually does have a hierarchy to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then Sharon Mitchell in the chat mentioned that priority hire status varies from campus to campus. Like I said, SEL colleges, I think we've ended that. It's probably less likely that other institutions will continue that as well, just because of the way that the job market is moving, but it is a great thing to have if you are able to, if you're able to acquire that. Moving into another question. So there was a question about what is an R1. R1 refers to research institutions where they highly value research and publication over teaching. So the University of Washington is one of those places. Could you expand on what cultivating connections in the community could look like at a community college? So that is our next question. That's a substantial one. So what does it look like to cultivate community?
Sorry, Justina, this is great. I want to go back to R1s really quickly, and then go into that much more complicated conversation about community. The Research 1 institutions do value research. I would say it would be difficult to get anyone at the University of Washington to say we value it more than teaching, but we know that inherent to the system of values in higher education that research is often placed at the top and teaching is demoted as a lesser practice or a lesser engagement. We don't believe that at the Simpson Center, and that's not what we've been up to, but that's just a kind of general sense. The reason it's so important to emphasize this is that it relates to the stigmatization of community colleges because they're understood to be teaching focused, right? So you really need to interrogate what you think about scholarship, public engagement, communities, teaching. Where are these things in your map? How has that map been devised by you in a thoughtful way, or has it just been have you just kind of accepted that this is the system of values in which I live and work? And I will aspire to the top of it because that's what ambitious and exciting people do. And then you go toward research, just very naturally, right? Stigma's work is a kind of naturalization of things. You have to fight against that to think about to your colleges effectively and clearly. And so the last thing to think about with R1s that I would just mention is they're distinguished from other institutions by the fact that they grant doctoral degrees. This is also where most future faculty will be trained. So it's exceptionally problematic that the value of research over teaching could persist in that very specific space because it will then be taken, unfortunately, out into the rest of the higher ed landscape. And that's what we need to break down and interrupt. That's the goal of conversations like this, right? But I would love to hear from others about the meaning of community to you. And we know that these institutions look very different, even in the Seattle district, North, Central, and South, completely different, let alone Yakima. So there's a lot to talk about. So I'll turn to all the rest of you now.
And again, the question was, what does it look like to cultivate community at your institution?
So I'll jump in again and break that silence, I guess. I think within the institution, it's about finding like-minded folks who have the capacity to, this is the thing, right? Like everybody's overloaded with work as well, but who have that capacity and motivation to do the work that needs to be done within the campus. For example, we really started with a reading group about 3-4 years ago, and that reading group by progressives, a diverse group of progressives on campus, turned into our equity team eventually. Also, accreditation and strategic planning type of work this is where we've been able to really push our administration to build connections within the community outside of campus, right? So as we've been able to be involved in our strategic planning, several faculty members have, and we're making sure, like, hey, do you have focus groups that are going out in the community and really listening to leaders around the community about what YVC is, should be, and perhaps is not?
Yeah, so Travis's comment kind of focused on what does it mean to build community with colleagues and faculty. And so I might just address what it might look like to build community or find community with student populations, both on campus and off campus. And so that really just means understanding like the community that the college serves. So for Tacoma, for example, we have a very high number of veteran students at our college. I think probably one of the highest in the state. We also did, or still do kind of, have a lot of formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated students, like students who are part of work release. And because we are aware of how our student populations are uniquely formed, there's been a movement on our campuses to serve those student populations. So different committees, different groups, kind of ad hoc groups who just interested in serving those students and striving for equity have come together to figure out appropriate interventions. For example, like a couple of years ago, a collection of mostly, not all, but mostly English faculty got together and, like, on a Saturday morning went and visited a work release program, like a home where students were living, because we knew that we had those students in our classrooms and we needed to understand all of the barriers that they face just getting to campus, being a student. And we needed to kind of speak to them in that environment in order to better understand. I don't know that that's necessarily the kind of activity that is really highly encouraged or part of the ethos of a four-year institution. And I'm really excited. Like, I like the fact that we can't just, go wake up, teach our classes, and come home, that we have to recognize where we're living and who we're dealing with in order to do our jobs well.
Thank you for that, LaToya. I think that also kind of speaks to, I think Rachel and Travis were talking about just the focus of EDI work in the community college. That is part of establishing community and understanding the community that you're part of. So that's another reason why it's so essential as a community college faculty member. Any other insights to add to that? If not, we can move on to the next few questions. There's quite a few practical questions coming up now, kind of related to hiring and the workload. So the next question, is there an easier way to search for employment opportunities at the two-year colleges? Like, is there a website that we could go to for looking for call for proposals, for example? Grace mentioned that there's a UPenn website, I think, that explains some employment opportunities. Beyond that, I can speak to the Seattle colleges. As far as I know, they advertise their faculty positions on LinkedIn and Indeed, and also on the Seattle college's website if you go to the hiring link. I'm not sure if there's like a collective source where you can find information about two-year college hiring practices across the state or the country, but maybe someone else could speak to that. Rachel, that seems like something you might know about.
I'm happy to tell you what I think I know. I think what is inherent in that question is a sensibility about what is the job that you're applying for. And if you go in the national job market and you look at all the job listings for schools that are not two-year colleges, you have your package you're developing of materials and things, and you kind of just imagine yourself, at least I did when I was thinking about doing that, distributing it out just across this vast landscape, and it would be read by people and understood. When I think about applying to community colleges, and we've run a lot of workshops on how to do that effectively with people who, like many of our panelists, have served on hiring committees into your colleges, everything is about the specific institution, everything. And so you need to do everything you can to not just know that institution, but be known by that institution. And I would say that this might be a good time to address the strategy, and it could be an important thing to do, of adjuncting strategically as a grad student or after grad school at a particular institution. And I know I'm thinking of someone who's faculty at Central on the tenure track now for 4 years. She adjuncted after her PhD program. That's a long road, but it's something we need to address as a real component of a job search at a tier college. It shouldn't take 4 years. For many people, it doesn't, but if you have a specific institution you're committed to and you're willing to walk that path, it can result in a really fulfilling career. It asks a lot of a person materially and on every other level, but I would just say it's something that we should address. I think cold applying across many different institutions with very similar or identical materials would be not a good strategy, just as a baseline. So even if you have nowhere central to go and look for job ads, you could methodically go through a list of many colleges, find the jobs, find the adjunct pools to jump into. If you do that, even that will require you to tailor the materials to each individual institution to demonstrate that you understand who they are and to show how you would fit there. That would be my recommendation. I just don't think you'd get anywhere otherwise. It's just a necessary step. How much time you need to spend in the actual classrooms of that particular institution, the answer to that varies, but I think it's something to think about too. It may not be an application process that you're looking at. It may be like a long-term engagement with teaching.
So I just want to, I just want to kind of highlight that, yeah, having served on a number of search committees, faculty and otherwise, we can tell when you've given a boilerplate kind of statement. We can tell if you have any sense of what the community college mission is. We can tell, or we can get a good sense of whether or not you are committed to us as you know, a matter of principle, or whether you're settling. So it's really important that you reconcile what you're about before you apply. Otherwise, it will probably be a waste of your time and your effort.
I just learned that the majority of our applications come directly, like people find our job postings on the state jobs website. And I think that that's the first place they go from our community and technical college system, that's the most reliable place in our state to find those. And I suspect that might be the case in other states for, you know, public colleges, just as a pragmatic point.
It hasn't been mentioned yet, but 5 years ago when I was looking for a job, I heavily relied on higheredjobs.com, both for searching at the actually I didn't search at the 4-year level, but searching at the 2-year level, I was able to get some really great information that way. So I would highly recommend that as a resource.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, LaToya. It's also in the Google Docs, so that seems like a really good resource. There was one thing I was going to say. Oh, I will say that as far as applying for like tenure track or full-time positions at the community college, your chances of being hired as a tenure track or full-time employee will greatly depend on whether you have taught at that institution before. So I would say that the best way to get your foot in the door is to adjunct at minimum. Teach a few classes at a community college, try out different community colleges. A lot of times you can pick up 1 class, maybe 2 classes in a year. That could be something that you work on while you're in graduate school, or it's something that you could look into even afterward. But that is a really good way to get your foot in the door, because at least the hiring committee that I was on most recently, or actually the past couple, the people who were hired were people who had been working there part-time. So we knew those people, they were part of the community already, they already knew what that institution was like, and that really helped. Okay, let's move into the next question. I think the question was, what is the interview process like at the community college? What is the job interview process like? So would anyone like to speak to that? I could speak since my face is already here being spotlighted. I'll speak first to my experience of being hired and then to my experience of being on the hiring committee. So the very first time I ever interviewed for a full-time faculty position at a community college, it was actually at Tacoma Community College at the same time Latoya applied. So we know who got that job. But I went into there, and this is probably why I, didn't really succeed, but I went in there not realizing that it was going to be a whole panel of people that I was going to talk to. I knew that I had to do a teaching demonstration because they told me that. So I prepared a 15-minute teaching demonstration. And then when I got there, they gave me the interview questions about 10, 15 minutes before the interview so I could think about them, and then we did the interview. At that interview, there were, I think, 4 people, maybe 5, and they were English faculty and then some administrators too. I think the dean was also one of the people who was there to interview. And so they all asked questions. They're all there to evaluate you. And that was similar to when I was on the hiring committee. I was one of 4 people who was on that committee. And so every interview that we did, that interviewee was talking to 4 or 5 different people. So that would be something to be aware of, is like you are meeting several of the community members just in the interview. So that's important to be aware of. It's not just like a one-on-one conversation, basically.
Okay, so sorry, I don't know how to follow that up. Like my bad.
No, it's great.
So it's actually, I had a similar, obviously, experience, but because I was on the East Coast, I was doing my interview virtually from, the whole process. So, virtually, we had to I didn't have students to kind of do my teaching demo to. It was just to the committee, but, as Justina said, the committee is, for faculty positions, always includes the dean, often includes the chair. I would say probably always includes the chair anyway, the dean, the chair, and then preferably at least one faculty member who's not from the division or the discipline, and maybe another faculty member who is from a related discipline, just to get, as much diversity of thought as possible. Also, just to call back to how very different interview processes are, incoming processes are. I actually did get a committee to kind of welcome me and say, here's where you're staying, here's where you can go, here are some students to talk to and show you around campus. So I'm so sorry, Travis. So but you can get that experience at the 2-year college. And I will say that from some of the efforts that I've seen from recent hiring committees where we are trying to get, people who have doctorates, we are learning that we do have to do more of that very thing in order to communicate to those faculty that they are valued, that we want them here, and to give them more data so that they can make an informed decision.
Yeah, I'll just say we're actually in the process of reforming our interview teams right now. So in the past, we've had like 3 people from the department, 1 person from outside the department, and then the dean. Well, this causes some problems actually, which I've run directly into, where the motivations of that department may be such that there are internal politics going on, and having 3 people there was creating some problems. So now we're looking at doing 1 or 2 people from the department, dean, 1 or 2 people from outside the department, plus an advocate in the room for the interviewee, for the applicant as well, to make sure that their rights are, maintained. We're also making sure that the folks who are on the interview teams now have gone through professional development on equity and bias and things like that as well. So we're really trying to improve this process. We're trying to do it earlier. This is another thing, is that our college and several colleges, 2-year colleges, often hire late, like spring, summer. I was given the official offer in July to start in September, and the interview was late May. that's later than most, but not totally an exception either. So.
Yeah, thank you, Travis. One last thing I'll mention, and I was writing this in the document, is that the teaching demonstration is a really important part of that interview process. So I think it varies depending on where you're being hired. I think it's typically 15 minutes of a teaching demo, and sometimes you'll be just teaching the interviewers, the people who are there to interview you, and sometimes you'll be asked to teach in an actual classroom. So that can vary. And again, just recognize that that is a very important process. You want to be prepared, since so much of your job is going to be teaching at the community college. They are really going to be looking at how you teach and how well your teaching style and persona kind of fits in with an institution. So, okay, so moving on to the next question. We're running out of time. We got about 20 minutes. How is the teaching load different at different community colleges? Would anyone like to speak to that?
I mean, I can, but I don't necessarily want to. I actually was just going to ask, are there any questions about like application materials? Because I think we might be able to loop that in with the previous question we were just addressing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I can look at what's on the document here, and we can come back to the teaching load question. Let's see.
And the only reason I don't want to address that is because I teach dev ed, so my teaching load might sound very scary to people. So I'm not in the best position to answer it.
Yeah,
So
we can come back to that.
Questions 12 and 13
Yeah.
are asking about sort of what would I include in my application to help me get the job or to get the interview.
So I just want to answer that I can't remember if it is something that is uniform across the state. I think it is, but how it is assessed, how it is implemented might be different. But it is very likely that candidates will have to write a diversity statement of some sort. And I just urge anybody who is applying for a job to take that statement seriously and make sure that it is different from a cover letter. You know, it is different from your teaching philosophy. It is a diversity statement where you are really talking about acknowledging, you know, what you understand about how you show up in the classroom, how you show up on campus, what you might have unpacked, uncovered about your own identities, and how they inform your teaching. So in the past, some unsuccessful diversity statements that I've seen have, you know, people will have written, and these are like real things. I've seen this on every search committee I've been on. People might say, well, I know about race and diversity because I have a Black child, a Black husband, or, you know, things like that, where they are essentially using these other human beings with full realized identities as their kind of tokens for diversity, and that's not good. And you want to just make sure that you kind of reconcile with that and you clear that up and you understand fundamental terms like racism, fundamental concepts like culturally responsive teaching, all of that as you are working on your diversity statements.
It's going to come out in your teaching demo too, right, Latoya? Right? Like if you haven't done that personal work, you might even put together a decent statement. But at some point, you know, your teaching demo is going to come and it's going to be this low context, like passive teaching demo or something like that. You know, like you can tell when the work has really been done by the actual individual and when, and to that point too, like how much you've taught in a community college. Really is less important, I would say, just for me and the committees I've been on. How much you've taught in the community college is less important than your ability to teach in the community college right now.
Absolutely.
And the work that you've done.
Absolutely.
I will add to that. You know, I think it's really important to kind of be aware of those terms, be aware of your positionality in an institution and in society. But I also want to say that that learning is a process, and it's a process that you will be able to continue at a community college. So if you feel like you haven't, gotten a lot of experience working with diverse students or diverse colleagues or diverse communities, that is okay, because I think if you are invested in those communities and invested in that work, and you start doing that work, that is enough to continue at a community college. So I'll say that. But I'll also mention, so Latoya, you made me think of something. On a lot of the cover letters that I've seen, people address the issue of like, how do you deal with diversity in the classroom? They answer that question by saying that they teach readings and texts by diverse authors.
Yeah.
And that's true. I think all of us do, but you want to kind of push beyond that a little bit more, right? Because that's not enough to really give us a sense of how you address diversity, how you work with it, right? And then going back to kind of like the concrete answer to the question of like what you do when you apply, you'll have to have a cover letter, you'll have to have a resume, of course. In your cover letter, don't emphasize your research, emphasize your teaching. That's probably something you've already heard before. And if you don't have a lot of experience in the community college, I saw a question there that says that a lot of the applications ask for 2 or 3 years. Try teaching a class or two during the summer. Sometimes that's a good way to pick up classes. That's what I did to get my foot in the door in graduate school. And that's not 2 or 3 years of experience, but it was enough to show that I knew what I was entering in the community college, and that's important. So,
yeah. I would also add, you were absolutely right, Justina, that like we're not looking for the perfect end person or product. That's not possible. So you can use the diversity statement to just talk about where you're at, like what you understand about yourself right now in this moment. And I actually, personally, I actually like seeing candidates who write about the fact that, I haven't quite reconciled, my heteronormative behavior. I haven't quite reconciled my, internalized, racism, that kind of stuff. I like seeing people just unpack the messiness of their complex identities, because it speaks to how authentically they'll show up and how thoughtful they'll be about their teaching practices. And in terms of what else to include, like to highlight on a resume or a CV, I really like seeing community service activities or professional development activities of sorts. So for example, I would, for a graduate student who might not have a lot of community college teaching experience, but they noted a session like this as professional development, I would totally be into that.
As for the 2 to 3 years of experience bit, I'm a big believer in general, and I'm sorry my screen is so dark. My light went out over here. Just apply for jobs you're not qualified for. I think that's really important as a skill. You don't need to go through the bullet point list of every single thing that the ideal non-existent person will bring to the job, right? Just to the point Latoya was making about being a perfect end product. Nobody is. So it's more about how you resonate with the position. If you truly don't meet the minimum requirements, you won't get looked at, but it's worth a try to begin the process. That would be my recommendation in general.
What Latoya said sounded like somebody who's ready to do that work, right? You don't need to have this long list of to prove yourself, but in how you articulate yourself in your own positionality can indicate a lot.
And the other thing we should say about how much experience you may or may not have in working with diverse publics or classrooms, this again relates to the stigmatization of community colleges in R1s and what R1s look like. We know they're lacking in diversity across the board. So if the undergraduate population is not as diverse at a four-year college where you're doing your doctoral program and you're teaching those students and they're not as diverse, you end up with less diversity experience, right? And less awareness, potentially. There are ways to correct for that. And I think it really requires us to take a critical view of where we are. So if you notice this lack of diversity and you want to correct for it, you may not be able to do that within the institution, right? And you want to be careful to not overly do sort of racial taxing on particular students or particular groups, right? Because they're already overrepresenting racial identity or whatever identity, but just by embodying that minoritized status on the campus, right? So that would mean, to me, it's an opportunity for you to do public scholarship that engages diverse communities beyond the campus. And how do you thoughtfully do that? And it may be focused on race, it could be focused on class, it could be focused on geography. There's a homelessness crisis and a hunger crisis among the students in community colleges, especially right now. How can you work on that? You know, and you don't have to work on it constantly, but how can you be really aware of it? Another takeaway I wanted to say is that you can glean a lot of insight and just a kind of almost immersive awareness, like a tone, like to understand the tone of the conversation and what's going on just by reading in the higher ed press about community colleges. So even the most disconnected grad student who doesn't have a mentoring program available to them, doesn't have some big fellowship opportunity that they can meet all the people at the two-year colleges in a particular network, you could just minimally read about two-year colleges, read about the students, what are the trends, what is going on there. And then you'll know so much more, because you probably won't be taught this in your classes. You probably won't be trained for it explicitly, but you could take it upon yourself to just find out with like a level of curiosity that befits a grad student or someone who's interested in teaching in higher ed, to find out more about this vast, you know, community of colleges. The other thing to know is these colleges teach maybe 50% of undergrads in the United States. I don't think we've mentioned that. This is half of higher ed, okay? And half of students of color, community college students. So it gives you a little picture of how big it is, you know, and how much more curiosity we should really all be showing about it if we're in higher ed at all, is my view of it. So look up good articles, Google it, sign up for updates, follow people on Twitter who know what they're talking about with this, and then you'll just get a better sense of it. And that will help you with all of the things that the panelists have talked about in terms of job materials, being the right fit, and knowing who you are in relation to the place.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Let's see, are there any other questions about like applying to community college or what the application should look like? If you'd like to type them in the chat real quick, we could answer them. If not, we can move on to maybe a couple more questions. I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of them. Related to this question about the job application, there is a question about whether a non-specialist or multi-specialist is attractive or not for the community college environment. Could we answer that quickly? I mean, my personal thought, when I was on the hiring committee and saw applicants who were kind of cross-disciplinary, like for example, one time I had an applicant who was an English teacher and a science teacher, and had done both. And she was a very compelling applicant, but then ultimately we did end up going with somebody else. Actually, we went with other people to push forward in the hiring process. And it wasn't necessarily because she was cross-disciplinary. I mean, I thought that actually added to her application, but what she, I think, didn't do as well as she could have was emphasize the English part of it. So I guess I would kind of say cross-disciplinary work is great, probably even a good thing, it's a benefit, but do recognize that you'll be hired for a specific discipline. So, you know, try to balance that a little bit. Okay, sorry, I didn't spotlight myself there. Latoya, did you want to say something?
No, I would just say that in theory, I've appreciated and I like seeing people who have a multidisciplinary background, but I have spoken to a couple who they've had a lot of difficulty because of that. So I see it as a benefit, but it has been a bit of a challenge just you know, making sure that people know that they have the credentials that is required for accreditation purposes. So it's just something to think about.
Yeah, so I guess one thing that you could do if you're concerned about your cross-disciplinary work working against you, just emphasize the one discipline that you're applying to, right? I mean, you don't have to put both of them in there. That would probably be my suggestion. There's a question in the chat about the difference between a teaching philosophy and a diversity statement. And I think others can speak to this, but I would say that the difference is that, in my experience, the teaching philosophy addresses some elements of what a diversity statement would, but it really gets more at like who you are as a teacher, how do you approach teaching in general. And I would say that I wrote a teaching philosophy for applications to universities and like university positions, R1 positions, but I don't think I had to submit one for my community college position that I applied to. So I think different institutions will require different things. Sometimes institutions won't even ask for a diversity statement. Sometimes they will. So of course it's good to have it on hand, but not all of these places will be asking for the same thing. Does anyone else want to talk about the difference between teaching philosophy and diversity statement? Okay. All right, didn't mean to take over that question. Okay, so let's see. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Let's see. We had some answers to the teaching load. I guess, yeah.
Somebody asked about teaching high school and transitioning to two-year college as well. And having taught high school, there are some things that you could take from from having taught high school that will definitely help you, like in terms of assessment, right? Like we have to do major assessment projects. Like it feels like we do that more at the two-year college than I have at R1s and four-year colleges. So the understanding of assessment, active learning is something that's going to be valued at the two-year college as well. So really try to draw on those skills, I think. In terms of is one preferable to the other or not, I don't know. I taught 2 years in high school and knew that I couldn't, the K-12 system in our country is not sustainable for a lot of educators, I think. And knew I wanted to work on the systems and teach elsewhere at some point, I think. So I don't think it's as simple as which is preferable. There's going to be a lot more high school positions, right? So yeah, I guess I'll just stop with that for now, but happy to talk more about that too. So email me, whoever posted that question, if you want to chat more about that, I'm happy to do that.
I would just add that high school teachers can often teach college classes, and many community college faculty are teaching lots of high school students. And the way that that happens is through dual enrollment. And I'm sorry, I don't want to like break this down for people who already really know what this is and they're just in it already, but it is a really important distinction. It's something to know about. It's an important phenomenon. There are people who may not want to teach high schoolers at all, and they go into the community colleges and they find themselves with many dual enrollment or running start in our state, or kind of these college in the high school classes that go back and forth. There are a lot of versions of it, but you may have quite a few students who are coming from the high schools into the community college campus to get college credit. Dual enrollment is very simple in terms of the structure. There are so many variations of it. That's what makes it complicated. But the simple point of it is that you could be a high school student who's taking a high school class, but you're also getting college credit for it. So dual enrollment speaks to being dually enrolled in higher ed space and in your K-12 space. I really love working with high school teachers, especially when they're teaching those classes that reflect our curriculum at UW. There's a whole program about UW in the high schools. This is a dual enrollment program I've worked on. I love it. Justina has worked on it. It's so powerful, especially in rural communities, which I'm from one, and to know that there could be a way that you wouldn't have to necessarily drive out of town, leave your community behind to go find even the closest community college to take to your college classes from, that you could have that in your own high school. I mean, that's just a really powerful model. But at the two-year colleges, you may have high school students for quite a few of your sections. I would prepare for that. I would think about what the differences might be and think about what their goals are. Who are those students? I count them as part of the diversity profile of any community college. That age is a factor in diversity. You'll have high school students and you'll have people returning from, and we would refer to them mostly as like lifelong learners, where people coming back. I've heard Brian speak to this too, that there's this real age diversity. at community colleges, that it gets overlooked as something that's fascinating and really that adds a lot to your career and to your life when you talk to people from all these different kind of parts of life, right? But I would say it's a false choice, two-year colleges versus high schools. It's more about where do you want to start? Which place do you want to go first? And then stay open to possibly leaving that space and going to a different one. And then leveraging both for your next goal. You don't have to necessarily conceptualize yourself as a two-year college faculty for the rest of your life or high school teacher for the rest of your life. And you might find that it's far more diverse than you expect in terms of the workload and the students.
All right, thank you for that, Rachel. We are just about out of time. Should we try to answer one more question or should we wrap up? Okay, let's try to answer one more question. Because I think that actually what you're talking about, Rachel, kind of segues pretty well into that stigma conversation again. And there was a question about that. Basically, how do you deal with some of the stigma around settling at a community college, especially when it comes from colleagues or students? Would anyone like to answer that? I'll just say really briefly that I didn't have that stigma because my mother is a community college teacher, and so it was, you know, the community college setting was very familiar to me. I think that the fact that we are spending so much energy and investment in teaching students and teaching people, to me is just so important that I just can't imagine having that stigma against community college, but that's just my perspective. I recognize that it is very different in other institutions of higher education. So would anyone else like to speak to that? I know Rachel has a lot of.
I have some thoughts, but let's show you. You were actually at a community college, so by all means, go first.
No, I will just say that maybe perhaps my view is also skewed because I'm also like the daughter of a community college professor. So, but yeah, honestly, my answer to that question was, oh, by being a smartass. I'm just so defensive of community colleges. So I would probably address it if I was talking to a colleague. I would probably like do it in a way that put the onus on them to kind of explain, well, why shouldn't these colleges be valued in the same way as four-year institutions? I think I would probably make them defend their position rather than having to defend two-year colleges, because two-year colleges don't need to be justified. They're great institutions.
I kind of had the same reaction, like really? Then you don't understand two-year colleges, like where this stigma exists. And, you know, hopefully it's an opportunity to help really show the power and the importance of two-year colleges. But I have that same reaction, like, are you kidding me? Like, you're looking down your nose at me? Come on, like, get your priorities right. But that's me being judgmental.
I would say to Marshall, everything inside of you that has ever cared about any other stigma, and then use that to work with that person on what they're up against in their own thinking, which is, it's flawed thinking. They're thinking without clarity and without actual knowledge about two-year colleges if they are looking down on them. I really would challenge anyone to talk to the people I've talked to in our system, just in Washington State, I mean, who teach in the two-year colleges. They're absolutely impressive, just so impressive. I mean, so if just all you want is to be impressed, you get that too. You don't even have to go for diversity as something you care about, and let's talk about why we shouldn't stigmatize minoritized groups. Like, you don't even have to go there. You can just say, look at this person's CV. Look at this person's publications and scholarship on teaching and how that person engages the classroom and the community. I mean, I admire these people so much who do this work that it's hard for me to imagine kind of being very patient with someone who would devalue their work. But it happens all the time. And where I'm the most concerned about it is that it happens in advisor relationships before a graduate student might even know anyone in a community college. They may hear, or it may be a reverberation across a doctoral program. Other peers, other students may look down on those colleges and look at them as a lesser outcome for a career. And advisors and faculty at R1s could look down on them too and could devalue that outcome. For students, it's very concerning. You have to stand up against that. It is up to you to interrupt it. And you can use any number of strategies to do that, including hiding your real intentions from people who will be in your way to achieve this goal. And you can tell them that, in fact, your goal is to land at an R1 and be just like all of the faculty who are training you in your doctoral programs, your only goal. If that's truly your only goal, and I really think that that's a fantastic goal, but this is not the moment in our history as a profession to have that be your only goal. You have to protect yourself. You have to diversify your goals and think about what else you value and what else you could do. And what I have arrived at is a sensibility that there's not enough time in my life to pursue all the work in the humanities that I want to do. What do I have time for? What can I do? Where am I right now? What can I achieve where I am? If that's how you feel about your work, nothing that your peers could say to you could shake you, because you have that core sense of what you value. Like, I could easily go happily teach high school tomorrow or 2 or college, whatever, right? So if you build a mindset that has a lot more to do with career diversity and like a willingness to go and work and do the work you care about, wherever that may be, you will be the person who's the beacon of real engagement and real work in the humanities for the people who need to hear it. And those are the people who are just misunderstanding the situation. They're frankly just wrong. It's okay to say that they're wrong about tier colleges because they don't know what they're talking about if they're looking down on them.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I think that really concludes our panel excellently. So we'll wrap up there. Thank you everyone for a great Q&A session and for such an engaging conversation. It was really fun to talk to everybody, answer these questions. It's been really insightful also to hear your questions. And again, the conversation doesn't have to end here. You're welcome to contact any of the panelists with further questions if you'd like to. And we even have a few people who have added their names and contact information on the Google Doc. So you are welcome to reach out to any of those people to talk through teaching at the two-year college. Finally, I wanted to remind you all that membership for TYCA-PNW is free this year for the 2020-2021 school year. And if you register, you'll get announcements about other events like this one. And it's a great thing to add to your CV to start engaging with the community college setting. So please do register. I did include a link in the chat, but you can also find it in the flyer that we sent out. So, all right, thank you so much again, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you to the panelists. Okay, so the panelists, if you'd like to stay on for a second, we can chat about it. I mean, people are taking off now.
I feel that I showed a lot of restraint in my anger. Maybe not quite enough.